ich dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschehen? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über alle Engel schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic.
And this is Matt Pegas.
And this is episode 62 with none other than the pastor of the Cowboy Church, J.L. Mackey, a friend of the pod, a writer on our side of Twitter. He recently, as I just alluded to in the tagline, wrote a novella called The Cowboy Church. It's very good. It's Southern noir, if I might be so bold. And the cover is by Michael Vincent. Very good cover. You've probably seen it around on Twitter. And welcome to the pod, JL.
Thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
Excellent. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say at the forefront, you have just launched along with T.R. Hudson. I think that Prudentialist is involved in some way. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe he's just a friend, a promoter. The Double Dealer Literary Magazine, and Sandbatch, of course, he's involved, right?
To a small degree, yes.
Okay, yeah. So, this is a new literary magazine, which we're excited about here. It's, great to see, guys on our side of Twitter getting together and, launching new literary ventures. And this one is actually a continuation of an existing literary magazine called Double Dealer, which discontinued publication in 1940 or something, right?
Yeah, I believe it was the late 20s. Yes.
Oh, wow. Even earlier.
Yeah, it didn't last very long.
Almost 100 years after.
Yes.
So welcome to the pod, JL. It's
I'm glad to have you on, JL. And obviously you've been someone who's been part of our orbit for a really long time, so this feels overdue.
So why don't you take us into a little bit your perspective, and in the notes that Matt and I discussed, we obviously want to talk about Southern fiction, and you're kind of, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but kind of taking up the mantle of reclaiming the Southern Gothic from its current fallen state in contemporary culture vis-a-vis the crawdads business. So tell us about the state of Southern literature and your plans to resurrect it.
Well, it's probably a little egotistical on my part to say I'm going to single-handedly do this. I will say that I'll try my best to do my part and try and revive it. But yeah, a gripe that I've had for a long time that I've written about kind of at length here and there is that Southern literature specifically, but also you could probably make the argument that literature in general has kind of lost its balls.
Yeah.
And with
As
respect to and I kind of honed in on Southern fiction just because that's what I've always enjoyed reading the most, and that's what I write, so that's kind of what I fixated on. But it seemed that over the last, I would say at least probably 15 to 20 years, although there were some writers who were still to one degree or another, trying to keep it alive into the early 2000s, like Harry Crews from William Gay, people like that. But feel like it got dramatically diluted and weaker, and it didn't have the kind of grit that made it noteworthy to begin with. And I found that really frustrating. And most of that literature devolved into fiction that takes place in the South rather than fiction that's fundamentally Southern and
aesthetically Southern. I thought that was a really good point in your Substack article on it, that it becomes this mere backdrop for it's kind of a subgenre within the general face of I guess mainstream facing MFA produced type literature that we talk about a lot on the show, sort of stuff that's obviously engineered and marketed towards like NPR moms basically, and like Oprah Book Club type of vibe, but it's like a subgenre of that's set in the South. Maybe there's a little bit of an expectation that like race relations will be talked about in some capacity, but it's basically just as you point out in your article, literature set in the South as opposed to having any of that Southern or Southern Gothic aesthetic. And I do see that happening for sure.
Yeah, I would co-sign on that.
Now, how do you feel as you're a Southern guy, right? You grew up and currently still, live in the South, right?
Yeah, well, I'm originally
not to dox you or anything, just generally.
Big portion of the country. Yeah.
I've lived in Alabama for a total of 5 or 6 years now. Before that was the military in North Carolina, and then I'm originally from the very hillbilly portion of Florida.
Okay.
So not Disneyland, but the scrub and the alligator portion.
The bog beef portion.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, you as a Southern gentleman, Southern guy, how do you feel when you see stuff like the crawdads nonsense and the NPR, as Matt said, the NPR crowd like eating it up, and like this is for people who are in the coastal areas like me and Matt, the other the NPR moms or whoever on the subway, this is their conception of the South. It's where the crawdads fart or whatever's going on there.
I mean, it doesn't, I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really surprise me that it's become kind of kitschy or like a cute thing for Yankees or coastal people to kind of like look at for 5 minutes and then turn away from, because it doesn't have anything to offer to them.
Yeah.
So it loses like any real cultural depth for those kinds of people. So I guess it doesn't really surprise me that sentiment makes its way into art as well. And you could count off endless movies that make absolute tropes of Southerners or backwoods people or mountain people, especially like the Appalachians. So, I mean, I felt like it was a matter of time before that found its way into fiction from sentiment and film.
Yeah. I feel like for better or worse, obviously for worse, the narratives that the media loves to push, they find a perfect home in Southern fiction, be it, racial narratives, be it sexual narratives. It's just like this perfect setting for them to both kind of push their agenda and extract like the, a lot of kind of storytelling and other potential from the setting, from the area, without actually engaging with the native styles of the South, and in fact, of course, without engaging with like the actual truth of what's going on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it makes for a really easy, scapegoat, because no one in Alabama or the Red Hills of Georgia are going to bother to rebuke some stupid Washington Post article about how we're all racists or inbred or whatever. Like we frankly don't care. So it
Yeah.
makes for a really easy target that's not going to fire any shots back.
And great Southern fiction, of which there obviously is. We were discussing in the show notes, Matt and I, and I'm sure you'd agree. Obviously Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, even going so far as, I don't know if we characterize John Kennedy Toole, but he is from New Orleans. That's kind of the South, right? Walker Percy, and of course, this is gonna, because I know he's one of your favorite writers. Is Harry Crews a Southerner?
Yeah, he was born and raised in rural Georgia before he moved to Florida.
No, I was gonna say, when you brought up the Scrubs and Alligator part of Florida, that's basically where Crews lived as well, right?
Yeah, Bacon County. Yes.
Yeah. That's in the what you call the Panhandle.
Well, the Panhandle is Florida and Alabama and a little bit of Mississippi. I don't remember exactly where Bacon County is, but I don't think it's very far over the line. So I believe it's southern Georgia.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Similar kind of landscape, yeah.
Similar landscape, yeah. No, I haven't read much Crews, but I've always meant to, and you definitely make a compelling argument to do so. My impression has always been, he really carries that Southern or Southern Gothic aesthetic, but also an I don't want to say a postmodern package, because that has a bad connotation for a lot of people in our sphere, but very like up to date sort of depictions of violence on a sort of street level, or again, I haven't read much of it, but because I've heard him mention the same breath as like William Burroughs, even, which maybe that's a weird bedfellows, but there's maybe a similar like delve into. Again, I haven't read it, so you tell me. But he's enjoyed, by a lot of people who I wouldn't think would be reading Southern literature. Like, oh yeah, Harry Crews is one of the greatest writers of the 20th century.
Yeah, I could see that, maybe a little bit. His work's really interesting to me. I could talk about him all day, obviously, but he definitely has some novels that are like absolutely like preeminent Southern Gothic, and some are less so. I believe all of which take place in the South, but there is definitely like Southern Gothic mixed in with like some absurdist dark comedy kind of things. That's some of which are absolutely like commentaries on modern culture. Like there's one of his books called The Mulching of America. Spoiler alert, is this man works for this giant corporation, I believe in Florida, and he's a salesman, and underperforming salesmen, well, they're just turned into mulch.
Yeah.
So
no, that makes sense. Yeah.
So it's definitely an interesting weaving of like Southern culture meets, industrialization or commercialization.
Yeah,
with,
that's what I was
atomization of modern culture. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, so I got to read more of that, because that sounds fantastic. I like a lot of the writers you've cited, like Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor was like huge early sort of influence on me as a writer and as a reader. And I like that Southern Gothic style a lot. But I also like, Don DeLillo and even like David Foster Wallace to a certain extent. I like that satire and sort of postmodern poking at modern industrial society. And also obviously talking about atomization in the realm of someone like Welbeck. It kind of sounds like Harry Crews, as you just articulated, does bridge that gap between the Southern Gothic, Southern style with that sort of modern, preoccupation with these problems that do affect the South, but also affect everyone else as well, and kind of getting this specifically Southern take on that, I think, is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I remember on the carousel, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you told Isaac that J.L. Mackey is a character from a Harry Crews novel. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. It's Jolan Mackey was the main character of Crews's book, A Feast of Snakes.
Okay. And he's much like the main character from Cowboy Church, Ezra. He's a bit of an irascible fellow, is he not?
He is, for sure. He is. He meets a little more violent end. I won't say explicitly, because that's a great book with a great ending, but he is definitely at his wit's end, and he goes out the only way he knows how to.
I think I remember on the pod, the carousel, it's something akin to a falling down scenario, the movie Falling Down, or am I just inventing that in my head?
I'm
Like
not familiar. I'm
a
not
guy
familiar with Falling
snaps.
Down.
Okay, like Falling Down is about a guy who just like a working man who snaps and picks up a automatic rifles and kind of goes on a low key rampage.
Maybe I feel like I've seen clips of this around on Twitter. Some
Michael
guy and like,
Douglas.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and he has like an RPG and a kid's telling him how to use it. Yeah. Um, maybe not to that degree. But I guess a similar sentiment. Yes. Yes.
I say. Yeah, good like literary nod in your handle there. I think many
Definitely.
of us yeah.
Is there, this
A
is
lot of
maybe this is a silly and irrelevant question, but I'm sure you're aware because when people are Googling you, there's also like an Australian, probably not that interesting philosopher named J.L. Mackey. Is obviously your name's not based on that. Do you know if Harry Crews was aware, or if that is that just a total, it's probably just a coincidence. I mean, it's, I guess,
I'm not sure. I
spelled differently, but yeah.
I I mean, just shooting off the hip, I would say probably not. As far as I know, Cruz wasn't big into philosophy or like reading,
Right.
strictly speaking, philosophy. I know he was big into classics and like Goethe and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
I think Mackey's very I'm not trying to diss this guy. I only remember him vaguely from college or whatever, but I think he's sort of very analytical, not super interested. He's not Nietzsche, which I imagine maybe Harry Crews might read. But yeah, it's probably just a coincidence, maybe an irrelevant topic. But I'm sure others have wondered it because if you're kind of Google, you're trying to find your Substack, you'll get a bunch of stuff about this guy first. But yeah. This is also just kind of a one-off, but I'm curious. Have you ever read the Harry Crews novel Florida Frenzy?
is that a
Hold on, let me look it up. I just
Florida
remember
Frenzy? I think is Tim Dorsey.
Oh, never mind. I'll cut that out of the recording. I hadn't read it. I associated with Harry Crews, and not having read it, I thought it was a fantastic name for a novel.
Sounds like a spring break party.
To it.
Florida
Yeah, exactly.
Frenzy.
Yeah.
I saw that
Oh,
on
it says
MTV.
Harry Crews, 1982, but I realize he
14
has
essays and articles and 3 short stories.
So he's prolific, right?
Quite, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I have not read that, but I've read all of his novels, and I have 1 or 2 of his collections of publications, essays that he wrote for Playboy and stuff like that. But
yeah,
I have
interesting.
not read that one
I don't
specifically.
know. Yeah, I'm literally just judging a book by the cover. I just thought, like, wow, what a name. And that seems to sum up an aesthetic, right? Like,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to jump into Southern Gothic, what would you say is kind of, because I think on the carousel you talked about this a bit, the definition in your mind of Southern Noir, Southern Gothic, and how does that differentiate from like classic noir tales are like generally I think of Los Angeles, Raymond Chandler type, detective in a morally gray world. But there's something interesting about when that kind of moral landscape and storytelling is set in the South. There's at least in our literary and film history a sense of kind of like I think you talked about this on the carousel, how they're all kind of the shadowy forces are all kind of like run by the same people in the town. Like there's a secret that the town is kind of founded on, and the good guy, the anti-hero, whoever is kind of up against the machine in the town. Does that strike a bell? Ring a bell?
Perhaps a little. I would say that the um I would say Southern Gothic is largely differentiated from maybe just Southern literature or noir, and the fact that it is specifically Southern, which is obviously kind of a nebulous way to describe something. But
Yeah.
like I ranted about in my Substack post, I would say it's it's Gothic for or noir for the same reason anything else is, which is that it concerns crime, poverty, the downtrodden, the grotesque, whether that's like spiritual or physical or whatever. In addition to being like particularly Southern, so dealing with like agricultural cultures or kind of pastoral stories, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's the, that kind of universe just in a Southern setting. And I mean, this is kind of splitting hairs, but what do you think then is kind of the difference between Southern Gothic and noir? Probably the presence or absence of crime and a kind of like, thriller literary structure, I would think. Because like Flannery O'Connor, I would characterize her as Southern Gothic. And obviously I mean, in some of her stories, there is, of course, the, literary device or element of crime and those themes. But it, you would be hard pressed to call her a kind of a detective writer. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say stories like hers and mine and maybe some of Cruz's stories are like less about the crime itself or the injustice itself per se, and more so about the, maybe you could say, the psychological, how it affects the victim, how the victim decides to deal with it or and exact revenge maybe, and things like that. It's less about the like the primary issue itself, and more about the secondary and tertiary shit that it causes. And
the psychological sort of effects, the internalization of the makes sense.
And we can see that in to segue to the Cowboy Church, your novella. It's on one level a very straightforward crime story. It's to not give any spoilers about a man who finds that his estranged father and sister have been poisoned by the drinking water on their farm. And there's shadowy forces at play who have caused this. And he sets off on a course to, a vengeance to correct avenge the wrongs against his family. And so that is very much like on the surface level. That's a thriller plot. That's a detective, in some respects, a kind of, mystery detective novel. But you do really get into the head of Ezra, the main character, who suffers from a kind of crippling pill addiction caused by some form of arthritis, I think, which inflames his body. And so he's kind of like throughout the novel in this kind of like haze that's penetrated by moments of kind of like clarity and action. And so we see a lot into the emotional effects of crime, the crimes committed against his family on Ezra, and his, ultimate decision to seek vengeance, which, very much plays into the, I guess what, and this is maybe getting presumptuous or whatever, but the metaphysics that our side of Twitter is trying to like promulgate is, generally more of a right-wing kind of defensive tradition, defensive family, basic morality. So this is like a story that kind of dovetails with the moral and metaphysical framework that some people on our side of Twitter are trying to, enshrine as the ethos of this writing movement, if you will.
To your first point, I would say, yeah, the crime that's perpetrated against him and his family is, as far as my intentions went, primarily just served as a backdrop or a framework on which to place all the things that I set out to talk about, which is like this weird obligation you have to family despite maybe fucking hating them from time to time,
Yeah.
and how that like that stone in your stomach like never goes away and you have to do something about it. You can't just ignore it, especially when it's something as extreme as that. So it's I didn't intend to, I didn't set out to write like a mystery or a crime or detective type thing. It's really just was something to lay the rest of it on top of that made sense, is reasonable, is believable to a degree,
Mhm.
and things like that. And as far as the like it being right wing, that also wasn't my intention to like to sit down and explicitly write a right wing piece of fiction, but I
Mhm.
just that ultimately it was just something that resonated with me,
Yeah.
and it just makes for a better story at the end of the day. Not to be like too reductionist about it, but that makes for
Yeah.
a good story. It's more resonant. It
Yeah.
speaks to you a little bit more than someone who is, I don't know, falls into like individualism and being withdrawn into themselves and being defeatist.
Yeah.
That just makes for a fake and gay story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And exhibiting like those kind of masculine virtues, like, yeah, these things do. It's not a political thing. It's not an ideological stance so much as they typically make better stories. When one exhibits the kind of boldness and dedication and loyalty that your protagonist ultimately exhibits. It's part of what makes a good story. So I agree with you there. And I did want to comment, like, kind of what we were talking about with Harry Crews earlier. I think your novella succeeds on that front in being both very Southern, but also, delving into these bigger sort of corporate tinged issues and atomization that, affect not just the whole country, but obviously, like, you get it in Europe with someone like Welbeck. It's kind of the theme of our time in a lot of ways. It's why people gravitate towards delicious tacos, is that theme of atomization. I like how you really brought it together with, very Southern setting, very Southern characters. Definitely succeeds on that front.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's a great book.
Yeah. And, to expand on what you just said vis-a-vis the motivation in writing it, and I think that kind of dovetails with something we've long been saying. I think Lomez started, may have said it first, that we're looking for right-wing authors making art, as opposed to like artists or authors making right-wing art. And yeah, just like, the essentially what you need is people honestly telling their stories, and it'll be a good story regardless, so long as you're actually, that the story is the most important thing, the first thing you're trying to do. And that certainly seems to be the case here with Cowboy Church.
I would definitely agree. I mean, some people seem to enjoy it and that's all they seem to be interested in or want to read, but I'm rather tired of overtly political fiction. If I want to read politics, I'll go read the news. I want a story. I want a good story first and foremost. If there's politics in it,
absolutely.
Sure, but that's like,
and
I can all go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's what we offer that the mainstream doesn't offer, because the mainstream is obviously, you turn on Netflix, it's politics first. It's their politics. And, if you want to actually read or watch a movie that is apolitical, that is today, that's like a political act to want to see something that isn't, shoving someone's agenda down your throat. And yeah, I mean, I would say like, Cowboy Church, yeah, it's just a straightforward kind of revenge story. And that's, to the extent that that is political, that's to say kind of that like the most basic human tendencies are political, which I suppose they are in a certain sense. But,
Right.
this, we have to set, guideposts somewhere. And yeah, I would say this is not really a political story. It's a, personal story. I mean, not necessarily personally. I'm sure it didn't happen to you. You're,
No.
yeah, you haven't been in too many. Although I was about to say you haven't been in too many gunfights. Not to, but you are a veteran, sir, are you not?
Yes. Yeah.
And to what extent? Oh, go on. Yeah,
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, to what extent does that inform your fiction, if at all?
I wouldn't say that it informs it at all.
Okay.
No.
Hmm.
I was never in a combat role or a combat situation, so I never shot anyone or got shot at.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, good. You might not be on the pod today.
touche.
Hmm.
Yeah, another kind of interesting part, which, naturally I kind of thought, that we all do to an extent, right, from personal experience. So the kind of like constant joint pain that Ezra is in, I thought, well, JL's a veteran, probably got, shot up or something, and he's in, a lot of pain. But that, I guess, is not the case. You just like chose the arthritis as a kind of literary, struggle or device to, create this, tension and drama within Ezra.
Yeah, I know. I don't have. I gave Ezra rheumatoid arthritis,
Hmm.
so an autoimmune problem that just gets worse with age and is very debilitating, and requires a lot of medication, etc. But I know someone who was diagnosed with RA um, in their 30s, and it wrecked them, and it wrecked them physically, obviously, because it's painful and debilitating, but also uh, began to affect like their mood, the way they
Oh,
interact
of
with people,
course,
because they're
yeah,
in pain and they become more ornery or difficult to deal with, or they're just frankly in a bad mood
yeah,
uh,
absolutely,
more frequently. And I was like, well, that's interesting, the way that being in constant pain can can like
influence.
right, yeah, can sour the life beyond your bones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that this is far afield, but I mean, obviously the opioid crisis was, at the very least negligent, or, certainly the Sackler family had, no altruistic aims there. But for people who are in constant pain, like there's, my father is getting older. He has back pain, and it's, becoming a question in my own family. Like, should we seek out, pain control medicine for him? Because, you need to, as much as like you want to avoid reliance on drugs and the issues that arise there, you also need to be able to enjoy life. You can't go out on a walk, then you're really not deriving that much enjoyment out of life. So and yeah, so we do see in the Cowboy Church that Ezra is, he is, very much a believer in pain medication.
Yeah, I think for him it started out as a way to alleviate his pain primarily, and then it, like a lot of addictions begin, it turned into it, escaping everything else, including his pain.
Yeah.
So yeah, the opioid thing is an interesting one. For while I was an undergrad, I worked for a while in a pharmacy, um, on the lower socioeconomic status side of town. And that was kind of jarring and interesting to see, is the amount of opioids that walk out the door seemingly for people who don't need them. It's a very strange phenomenon to see the kind of the back half of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it makes kind of like on the same other side of the horseshoe with Adderall or what have you. It just makes kind of post-industrial capitalism go down easier, right? Like whether it's, an opioid or amphetamine, it just makes kind of like going to your job, doing whatever it is you have to do. It's because like these are, to an extent, I mean, at least the office, the Bugman stuff is very unnatural. You're not doing that, JL. You have more of an outdoors job from what we discussed. But yeah, like sitting in front of your computer for like 7 or 8 hours a day, doing stuff that like okay, like I suppose what I do as a lawyer is somewhat Lindy. Like that is stuff that people have been doing throughout history, for better or worse. But I mean, a lot of these jobs, and I've had jobs before I was a lawyer, it's just like mindless office work. And I can totally see how without something like to take the edge off, it's just like unbearable.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I can't speak personally about drugs as a way to escape, like post-industrialism or whatever we want to call it, the
Yeah.
situation that is the 21st century. In a former life, pre-military, I did a lot of hard drugs, but that was mostly out of boredom.
Yeah.
But I can absolutely see why that would be the case for being in a shitty office job for 30 years. And yeah, I definitely see it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have a ton to say on kind of the drug culture of it either, but I just have this thought now. It's on the difference between the, hard drugs that you might do out of boredom, as you said, JL, and also drugs with like a pretty similar chemical compound that are delivered a little bit differently, like the opioid, pills. I'm not an expert on this, OxyContin and all that, and Adderall. The difference there is kind of funny because it's like I don't even know what I'm trying to say about this. It's sort of sad in a way. Like, you do cocaine or heroin, maybe on your own, maybe at a party, whatever. It's to relieve boredom. But now there's these kind of insidious, literal encapsulations of that same sort of feeling in a way that, as Dan was kind of talking about, is more suited to working a workaday life or just dealing with pain, whether that's Adderall or the pill forms of opioids. It's this weird sort of I mean, I don't know if it's intentional, but you know what I'm saying? It's kind of funny how like it's both these like very controlled substances and also these other substances that are legal, but like kind of do the same thing. And I think they are used, as Dan said, on a much more like maintenance, like making life go down easier basis, as opposed to alleviating boredom. There's almost something better about doing that stuff to alleviate boredom. At least you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't be quick to say that evolution from being recreational to being required to get through the day is entirely coincidental. That would be hard for me to believe.
Yeah. No, I don't think so either. I haven't delved deep into like the Sackler files, shall we say, but it's definitely insidious stuff. Dan, I think we wrapped up on drugs, so we can probably move on to the next topic.
Sounds good. We're all drugged out here.
I did I mean you can go. I did want to ask more about I guess Flannery O'Connor, because my own spiel with Southern literature is your point in contemporary Southern literature is well taken, and we talked about it earlier, how it's this completely declining thing in terms of what's getting written. I haven't been to college, I've been out of college for about 6 years now, so I don't know this for a fact, but I have a sense that it's not really being discussed as much anymore on campuses. But I can say that when I was in college from 2013 to 2017, actually the class that made me want to be an English major, which I guess is kind of a dubious honor, but nevertheless, the class that made me want to be an English major was a freshman writing seminar I took called Southern Literature. And that class, I will attest, was very good. It was taught by a guy who writes some contemporary fiction now. I don't know if I'll name him for docs reasons, but he was a very good teacher, and the syllabus was fantastic, and it was a lot of it was Flannery O'Connor, and we discussed her in a very interesting way. We also read Faulkner, which was at that time, that was the first time I'd ever read Faulkner. We read Deliverance, which I think probably has maybe a mixed reputation in certain Southern literature fields, because the movie version obviously is responsible for a lot of stereotypes. Nevertheless, I think John Borman, I believe is his name, seems like a legitimate Southern author, and I actually did like that book a lot. And we read Walker Percy. I think that was pretty much the main line of things we read. But the point I'm trying to make is that in context of, I think it was 2014 that I took that course, there really was still some good dialogue on Southern literature. I had a good experience in college with it. And as I said earlier, Flannery O'Connor was hugely influential, I guess, on me as both a writer and a reader, really opening up what a short story could do. And I think she's that way for a lot of people. And it wasn't just, not to just go on a rant here, but it wasn't actually just in that Southern literature class that we read her. We read her quite extensively in every creative writing class I took. And I think that was standard at a certain point of time, because she's recognized as such a master of the short story. She was very much one of those writers that creative writing teachers would have even in the MFA world, which I have issues with. I think at a certain point, she was viewed as sort of the gold standard. Now, I distinctly remember during the 2020 of it all, during the Floyd riots and stuff, some articles going after Flannery O'Connor, we shouldn't be reading these stories with the N-word and that deal with race relations. And this, obviously Flannery O'Connor's not racist, but they're not as anti-racist as would now be in vogue. What am I trying to ask here? I guess just it seems to me that I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like if I was in college now, I don't think there'd be that same level of education in Southern literature or on Flannery O'Connor. So I guess I'm just lamenting that, but also wanted to kind of open it up to you to talk more about your experience sort of reading O'Connor. And for me, she's still really the gold standard of what a short story can do.
Yeah, I would say if I had to rank short story writers, she would definitely be up there.
Mm-hmm.
Probably number one for me. I can't really speak to the college portion. I graduated in 2020 sounds right. 2020. Just as COVID was kicking off. So I didn't walk. They had a televised graduation, which was cool. So my name just went down the screen, and that was that. I started out as a computer science major, and then I transitioned to being a math major. So I never took a fiction course. I took a composition course, a one, and that was it. So
hey, out of the two of us, that's probably a more economically good way to spend your time in college. But yes,
yeah. I'll adjust that. I took a literary analysis course as a senior, just because I needed a class, and that was one that filled the blank or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was Pride and Prejudice, Candide.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
and something else.
Yeah.
But as far as reading other stuff, that didn't happen for me just because it didn't pertain to my degree. But I would venture to guess that kind of stuff is probably not being read at all, or at least dramatically less than it used to be.
What I think. Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, because when I was in high school, rural high school in North Florida, I'm reading all of this, a lot of Faulkner, Whitman, all of this Southern stuff. And it was great, and I enjoyed it. And I guess I kind of took it for granted, because now I don't know what they're reading. Ibram Kendi, I have no idea.
Yeah, right.
but that's what I would venture to guess. Is that stuff is largely
Yeah.
not being taught or even discussed for one reason or another.
Yeah. I mean, this is an issue that is, not just endemic to the South, but to all literature. You're not going to find any to say nothing of whether it's right or wrong. It's wrong. But the view on, race and everything in America today, the kind of current year political consensus, you're just not going to find that even in fiction from like 2005. You're certainly not going to find that in fiction from 1945, be it F. Scott Fitzgerald or, William Faulkner or, Flannery O'Connor. It's just, you're essentially, if you're not going to, if you're only going to read authors whose views endorse or are in concordance with the current best practices on all of these matters, it's just like all of literature goes out the window, and it's insane. So yeah, I mean, I think, and especially for some specific reasons, I think Southern literature probably is particularly afflicted by this. So you have people like Flannery O'Connor, who are not even arguably is one of the best American writers in American history. And you have, like Matt was saying, people saying like, oh, you can't read this because she said that, and that's crazy.
It seems to me that a landslide you're trying to run up, and then there's no keeping up with it. You're gonna run out of books that have been canceled faster than quality new ones will be created.
Yeah,
It's tiring as fuck, frankly.
yeah, and I mean, just also we have such literally the entire corpus of world literature, though it has though that's where the treasures are. It's not in what's being written in like 2023. I mean, like Nutcracker 2, of course, will be the best novel of all time, but aside from that, you do need to look to the classics to get the good stuff, as they get said.
Absolutely.